so that's always a great blessing. And the credit for that belongs to Jim Schilling, who has been our audio guy and kept everything going smoothly for us ever since he's been our partner. So I want you all to give a big round of applause for him. Thank you very much. We're also very grateful to have this opportunity to share a history hour with everybody. And I kind of wanted to start a little bit early on some of the things relating to upcoming events because I want to allow more time for you to enjoy Bill Scudder's talk. So, I don't have this up on the screen, but on your handout is a list of the upcoming history events in big type. Yes, it helps me too. So I want to go through them. Joan Mashal is going to be our contact person to set up a talk on, well actually it's just showing a musical in 1776. Joan, do you want to say anything about that?
So I've got the disc.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have someone who knows how to hit the name of someone who takes the disc into the projector.
That's Jim,
Who's Jim?
our electronics guy.
Make friends with
I'll give you the disc.
Yes. So thank you very, very much. I appreciate I think it's a great idea. It's a fun
If you
history
haven't
event.
seen the show, the musical 1776, it's absolutely fabulous.
Great, great. Thank you. On August 22nd, as it says there, Larry Chambers is going to be speaking with us. When I talked to him about it, there's several subjects, and I don't know which one it's going to be, but it'll certainly have to do with his naval career as an admiral. He's always a delightful speaker, so be sure and mark that on your calendars. A third item to mark on your calendar would be September 19th, when we're going to do a play, just to keep things off. The Road to Secession, which is actually going to be done in Washington, D.C. in its debut, but we're going to do it here, and we're going to use actors from here to do The Road to Secession, which is drawn from the last book that I wrote, and I think it'll be fun. The first play was well received, so we're going to continue that. The other big thank you is for Tommy Renault, who has been my co-chair for all this part of time, and the person in charge of helping me remember all the marketing things, well, remember everything I need to do, but also she's been the lead person in our what we call marketing, which is maintaining our mailing list and making sure as best we can that people know that the group exists. And because she is in hospice, I don't think it's any secret, I am looking for a co-chair that could help me with those sorts of things. Keep me from making stupid errors, and also to somebody this would be a working position. A lot of the other board positions are more advisory, but this would be somebody that can help with maintaining and updating our list. Now, this list is extremely important because we're not allowed to send emails to people that have not requested them, because we're a private club and not an activities club. So we have to have a good list of people that we know want to be contacted. So please give it some consideration. Send me an email or whatever, but could really use some help, as you can see. So that sets us up for today. Today, I want to introduce Bill Scudder, and the introduction he prepared for me is this: war is hell, and war is terrible, but man has been doing it since the beginning of time. We're going to hear today about Bill Scudder's company combat experience as a company commander in Vietnam. I said most of that right, didn't I? There he is.
Yes, sir.
So-
Thank you.
So, Bill, you take over.
Thank you, Dan.
Yes. Well, I can turn them off. I just don't have the skills.
Want me to turn them off?
Yeah, you know how? Thank you. John.
You need to be where I can see you.
Okay.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate y'all coming here today. Just for curiosity's sake, if you had any experience in the military, please raise your hand. Let me just kind of get a feel. All righty, gotcha. We're 50-50. Okay. Now, in most presentations, the people would say, hold your questions to the end, but not here today in the next few minutes. If you've got a question, raise your hand, holler, scream, stand up, do something, let me know. I want to try to provide information, and if you've got a question, let me try to answer it. I want to apologize up front if I use any offensive words or phrases. It's not intended, but I'm supposed to really tell you what it was like to be a company commander in combat in Vietnam. Now, company. We were air mobile. What does that mean? We went from point A to point B in helicopters. But once you got to point B and got out, you walked. The concept was finalized in 1963, tested at Fort Benning and over South Carolina and North Carolina in 64, and redesignated the 1st Cavalry Division and moved to Vietnam, deployed to Vietnam in 1965. When you say Georgia and the 2 Carolinas, you get a feel for the distance that the helicopter gets you or provides for you to operate. Company makeup. The average daily strength of my company was about 115 men. Now, you know a baby, a little baby, they know how to breathe and poop. That's everything else you've got to do. Bathe them, feed them, dress them, take care of them, make sure they're not getting in trouble. That's the responsibility of a company commander to those soldiers. You're responsible for everything. And unfortunately, for whether they lived or died. The company, as I say, about 115 daily, had 6 machine guns, 1 mortar. Attachments, I had a Kit Carson Scout, an artillery forward observer party, and a black hat. And I'll explain those 3 in detail later on. Occasionally, we would have dog teams, a handler and a dog, a chaplain, or any kind of press, either civilian or military, with us. Officers and NCOs. I had all the officers that a company's supposed to have. My platoon leaders were wonderful. All 3 were recent graduates from the Officer Candidate School at Fort Benning, 1 week apart, and one of them wasn't even 21 years old. When I took over the company, I was 29 years old. I turned 30 while in command. The senior sergeant in the company, the 1st sergeant, most companies in Vietnam kept them out in the field with the company commander. I did not. I kept the 1st sergeant in the rear the majority of the time. He would take care of all the administration, make sure the troops' records were straight. He handled the unit fund. He signed my name for me, spent all the money. Coordinated with Parker pen and pencil set for a tremendous Christmas gift for every soldier. He had 1 clerk, a hand-operated typewriter, and 1 man, which we called the log man, back helped with supplies. The squad leaders and platoon sergeants were not what you would expect in a normal company in peacetime, experienced and older. These were young soldiers who had proven themselves in combat and had been promoted into their respective positions. Typical day. We got up when the sun came up. Then we received a mission. No. Air cavalry, moving by helicopter. We didn't know our mission until that day, because it was reactive to what they discovered, developed during the night about the enemy. We were told we could go on a combat air assault, and I'll explain that in a minute. Or we could stay there and secure the location where we were for additional companies to come in and fan out and go on operations. Or we could go to a location, we could go in a specific direction, or we could go and told to check out groups of little 6 to 8 bamboo hooches that the civilian farmers lived in. And I lucked up. On one of so-called missions, I ran into 7,300 pounds of rice and 20 pounds of salt. It had been stored for the North Vietnamese army. It was hiding up in the mountains. And they would come down at night and get resupplied. I took it from them. We loaded it on helicopters and went back to the district resettlement location and given to the civilians. We had breakfast. It was called a B ration. That means reconstituted. Eggs, sausage or bacon, with toast and jelly, pancakes, sausage or bacon, or a biscuit and gravy with sausage or bacon. After breakfast, I knew that the entire company had been fed, because we had it set up to where the 2 leaders ate last, which means their platoons, all those soldiers had been fed. And then I ate at last after the platoon leaders. So everybody was fed. After that, they came and brought any replacements. Replacements came into the company location where the first sergeant was during the day. But you didn't want replacements to come out at night and be there for the first few hours at night. So they came out in the morning. They would bring them over to me. I would greet them, tell them a few things about how good the company was and complimentary about platoons where they were going. And then I would tell them the only way they would get in trouble with me was to be asleep when you're the 1/3 awake at night. You had one man at night in the foxhole. Helmet on, flak jacket on, rifle in hand, grenade front right of the foxhole. Always had 1/3 alert. If you fell asleep when you were supposed to be that 1/3, that was when you would get in trouble with me. And it proved very effective. Did R&R tours, rest and relaxation tours. Troops would go to Bangkok, Thailand, Philippines, Japan, Hawaii, and as you might expect, young soldiers had never seen women for 6 months. They'd never been around alcohol for 6 months. A recipe for disaster. They would get drunk and disorderly in bars. They would get involved with fights in bars. And the military has what's called a delinquency report, the DR. And it's addressed back to the unit commander, me. Sure enough, they would come in, and I would call the man up, and I would tell him, the only thing you can get in trouble with is if you're asleep at night. And then I'd read him what he'd done wrong, and then I would tear it up in front. And that got around to the troops. One other comment, the senior medic told him, if you're hit, if you're wounded, get down on the ground and call for the medic. If he doesn't come to you, it's because he's dead. We got water with breakfast, either in 5-gallon cans or in big rubber containers, bass, kinda. We call them elephant rubbers. Had about 20 or 25 gallons of good potable water. Had the men drink all the water that they had left in their canteens, and then refill them with this good water. The platoon leaders knew to come up to me and get the order. I gave the order. It was a standard field 5-paragraph operations order. Now we have a table in the back with various items for you to look at. Please feel free to pick them up, look at them. And there's a copy, the original copy of an order, the only one that survived that I have. And next to it, several copies explaining the abbreviations and what it meant. We started moving around 8 or 8:30 at the latest. And I was not popular. The troops did not like me, but I did not stop for lunch. At breakfast, you were issued a C ration, and I'll explain that because they're fascinating. Later, they wanted to stop and have lunch. I didn't. I felt we were susceptible to the enemy attacking. We lost time. I didn't like it. I kept moving all day. Though I did stop at 3 o'clock in the afternoon almost every day. I found what was called a landing zone for the helicopter that would bring in the evening's meal, bring in water, bring in mail, bring in items that we requested. Where we stopped for the night was called an FOB, Forward Operating Base. Now, most of the time in the rest of the units in Vietnam, where a company would spend the night was called NDP, Night Defensive Position. But in the CAV, to try to encourage the warrior ethos in the attack, it was called a Forward Operating Base. Once we stopped, we would dig in. Remember, well, what's that 1/3 alert? We would dig in, foxhole for 3 men, and then right behind the foxhole, a little hooch made of 2 ponchos. First, you see the frame here, and then the next slide will show the 2 ponchos over it. Now, this is jungle. You don't have tremendous visibility. 1/3 alert at all times. The other 2 men asleep. You blew, every man had an air mattress. You blew up the air mattress. You were underneath the ponchos. You had a mosquito net and 1 bug bomb. You sprayed it, take care of the mosquitoes before you went in. Coordination for the night. I would tell the platoon leaders when we would have what was called a mad minute. Now granted, it didn't last a whole minute, maybe 10 seconds at the most, where every man would be up in the foxhole, would fire 1/2 of a magazine, that would be 9 rounds, and 1 of the other handheld type weapons. And it varied during the night. I just picked at random a time. Now, I've mentioned the combat air assault. This is very unique to the CAV. Helicopters, they had hundreds of helicopters in the first CAV division. Standard package was called a 6+2. You had 6 troop-carrying helicopters. They're here flying, and when they're going from, after they had you on them and were going out to the landing zone, they would fly in 2 columns. Also, the 2, those are armed aerial rocket artillery gunships. It's not too clear, but there is one circling in the back of the slide. Helicopters usually carry 5 people. I felt, as a company commander, I should go in on the lead helicopter, and if we were having what was called a final extraction coming out, I would come out on the last helicopter. I would go with myself and 2 RTOs. That's a radio telephone operator. And of course, you know we didn't have telephones in the jungle, but we did have radios. One radio tied us into the next fire headquarters. One radio was my company net, as it's called. And unusual, I did not have separate platoon nets where it was designed that way because they did have the radios. But I had every radio in the company on company net. 5 people on the helicopter. Me, my 2 radio men, and then I would take a machine gun team, 2 men, from the last platoon in the helicopter lift. That's 5 people. Most landing zones were just big enough for 1 helicopter. Maybe once or twice I had one big enough for 2. Now, when you're on the ground going in or coming out, and there's only 5 of you on the ground, you guessed it, it did create a pucker factor. None of the helicopters had doors on them. So we were going to the landing zone. And they would fire normally a 15-minute artillery prep. And that would hit on the landing zone and then around it to kill or destroy any enemy that might be there. As we were going in the helicopter, I'd look out and I'd see the ground coming up. That meant we were heading down, we were going down towards the LZ. The last artillery round would be a white smoke round. ARA. Here is a pair of aerial rocket artillery gunships firing their rockets. They carried rockets on both sides, had roughly 40 rockets on each aircraft. And we called helicopters birds, 6 plus 2. 6 troop birds and 2 gunship birds. As I saw that ground coming up, I would get up and kneel between the 2 pilots, and I would look at the large compass on the instrument panel of the helicopter, where I could pick up the 4 cardinal directions. And then I could put that on the ground, and I knew on the landing zone the 4 cardinal directions, because that's the way I had told the company to set up. Plus, I could look at the terrain around the landing zone and analyze the most probable enemy avenues of approach. The last 15 or 20 seconds that you're going in just to touch down on the landing zone, the 2 aerial rocket artillery gunships would come up right next to the lead helicopter, and they would fire and ripple one after another about half their load along the side of the landing zone. In the last 5 or 10 minutes, the 2 door gunners, each helicopter had a door gunner on each side with a machine gun. They would swivel their machine guns around to the front and fire onto the landing zone. A long burst, 15 or 20 seconds. Get off the helicopter as fast as you could. Then you chambered around in a rifle. And you set up. And you set up by compass degree. The first platoon coming in on the lift had 360. And when you had 2 platoons, each had 180. Then when you had all 3 of your rifle platoons, each had 120-degree circumference, always in a circle that's set up by security. Movement formation, when you left and you were moving. You had 1 platoon out in front called point. And then they had 1 man walking out in front of the platoon called the point man. This was the most dangerous position in the company. It would be the first man across an open field, the first man across a rice paddy, first man into a hedgerow, or the first man across a little small bamboo bridge. Unfortunately, I lost 4 appointments. Another platoon divided in half, half on each side, and I specified which half I wanted the platoon leader on, the most dangerous side. The last of the 3 rifle platoons in the rear called drag, and I rotated religiously and never deviated. Point, drag, flanks. Point, drag, flanks. Now, on occasion, your next fire headquarters would put you on string. That meant I could not go more than 15 minutes away while we were moving from a pickup zone, because they may want to pick up my company and move it to reinforce another company that was in contact, or maybe go to another battalion that had been requested. I had the platoon leader in the black hat in the last platoon, always watching for the pickup zone. And if we ever got more than 15 minutes away from a suitable location for pickup zone, they would call me, and I would stop. We'd set up security, and then we would search around until we found a suitable pickup zone. Status of morale. Remember, this was at the height of the Vietnam War. 90% of the company were draftees. They didn't want to be in the Army. They didn't want to be in South Vietnam. They didn't want to be in combat. But I'm telling you, I'm not prejudiced, but it's a fact. The American soldier is the greatest in the world. Now, yeah, there's some small little elite special trained units in the Israeli army, the British army, and the German army. But average soldier, the American soldier is the greatest. He's brave, he's courageous. He doesn't balk. He follows orders. He takes the initiative if need be. He can take the place of his leaders if they're wounded or killed. Wonderful. Now, unfortunately, Vietnam experienced individual replacements. It's terrible. Previous, in all sense, replacements were as units, where you had cohesion, morale and esprit de corps always developed. We were constantly going through turmoil of new people. Replacement would come into Tan Son Nhut, the big airport by Saigon. We'd stay there for about 2 weeks because of the weather. It was so hot. Issued his equipment, and then come out to various units, come through division, brigade, and down to battalion. Walked over to the rear company area, and then came out in the morning to me as the company. When a man came for 1 day, the first day and the first night, he was called a newbie. After that, he was part of the team. Then, after 2 weeks, he was very battle savvy, what we call combat savvy. You learned how to drop down on the ground. We'll have a slide in a minute of some people on the ground. You drop down, not taking seconds, but milliseconds. You got down, because if you wanted to stay alive, you're standing up your target. Here's a slide of 2 men on the ground. And the individual soldier would become extremely sensitive to sound, movement, or light. We'd say, what do you mean light in the jungle at night? The muzzle flash of the enemy weapon. Morale was high. He had experienced leaders. All 4 company commanders of the 4 companies in the battalion were on our second tour in Vietnam. Of course, the morale went up when you killed some of the enemy. And I always rewarded any bravery in combat, putting men in for particular awards and decorations. Now, once a month, we got a box. It was called a Sundry Pack, and it was wonderful. It had all kind of candy bars in it. It had cigarettes. It had instant coffee, packages of instant coffee. It had little packages of compressed toilet paper. It had stationery, fountain pens. Got one platoon, one a month. I'd been in the company a couple of weeks when a platoon leader came up to me and said, clean. And we went through that last little bunch of hooches, picked up a puppy. What do I do? I said, well, have clean, bring the puppy up to me, and we'll talk. Ron Clean brought this little puppy up. I mean, it could fit in his palm of his hand. And I told him, you're responsible for the dog. You're feeding it, taking care of it. And if we were on ambush at night where we had to be quiet, or any time where we had to not make noise, you keep that dog quiet. He agreed, so I told him that he could keep the dog. I know of no other company in Vietnam that had a mascot in the jungle or the bush, as we call it, in the bush. Many units had mascots back at base camp. We were a special company, we felt. We had seen some written information that listed us as the best company and the best battalion. In November, battalion commanders rotated, and after a new battalion commander was there for about a week, he came out on the morning breakfast helicopter run and said, I'm going to walk with you all day. I want to find out what it's like to be a rifle company in combat. And he walked next to me all during that day, and we talked the whole time. Basically exactly what I'm talking with you today about. Sometimes you would go as a separate company or as a battalion, what was called OPCON, Operational Control, to help some other unit on a mission. I was sent as an individual company sometimes, and we were sent as a battalion sometimes. One time I got a super deal. Only one other company besides me got it. In the afternoon, the battalion commander would call up and say, I'm going to put you down by the South China Sea. So I'm the last one coming out, and boosh, and I join up with the company, and there's this big beach and sand as far as you can see in any direction, in the South China Sea. Well, you can't dig a foxhole in sand, so you scratch off a little bit of depression where you can get down, and then you had the South China Sea in the rear, and then I set up in a horseshoe with the machine guns at the particular location. Then, had the platoon leaders, no, we always had 1/3 security. Platoon leaders give a safety briefing, and then I give a safety briefing, making sure they didn't get into the water except in pairs. And then the troops stripped down. Most of them nude, most of us nude, a few still kept their shorts on. Went in the water, played in the water. A couple men blew up their air mattresses, and then they had battles trying to knock each other off their air mattresses. The salt water and the hot sun were fabulous for drying up all the infestations and little sores you had on your arms and legs. Then we found an old wooden boat that had been abandoned on the beach. We chopped it up with machetes, and we built a bonfire. One guy had a harmonica, and we still had our 1/3 security. But the rest gathered around this bonfire, and we sang songs. I ordered double ration of beer and soda that night. I paid for 6 cases, 2 of beer, 8 cases, 2 of beer, and 6 of soda each night out of the unit fund. Now, only your hardcore beer drinkers would drink warm beer. We never had ice. But anyway, I got 2 cans of beer for men and 2 sodas for men, okay? We got extra beer and soda that night, and I requested for any extra food that anybody had from the kitchen. The next morning, we went on a combat air assault. People problems. My biggest people problem was malaria. We got all kind of messages down from higher headquarters about how terrible it was you were as a unit commander if you had malaria cases. We were a test unit. Everybody took a little small white malaria pill, but we were a test unit for a large malaria pill. We called it the horse pill. You line the troops up, 2 leaders would watch them put the pills in their mouth, take a drink of water, and then say something. And that would signify that troop had his malaria pills. Now, halfway through a tour, you got what was called a mid-tour R&R, Bangkok, Philippines, Hawaii, you name it. And of course, when the troops would leave to go on R&R, we would give them a package of the respective amount of malaria pills that they were supposed to take daily. Does anybody think they all took them? I don't see any hands. You guessed it. So sure enough, I had 9 malaria cases, and they were all from men within 10 days or 2 weeks after they returned from out-of-country R&R, mid-tour R&R. My second biggest problem was bunching up. Americans like to talk. Don't you? Well, the soldiers are no different. Going through the jungle, they would like to sidle up next to each other and talk. Going through the chow line, they wouldn't keep distance, they would sidle up next to each other and talk. At the end of each day, I was hoarse from screaming, from shouting. Spread out, pick up 10 yards. Let me send you home on a freedom bird, not in a box. The jet aircraft carry you back to the world, as we call the States, the world. POWs, prisoners of war. I had very few. Handful at the most. However, for POWs, I had the oldest man in the company to be the prisoner guard. And he happened to be married, very stable, old. He must have been all of maybe 33 or 34, but I knew the prisoners would not be harmed. Jungle lore, or troop lore. Wait a minute, mine. You can imagine a stalk of a rose bush with all the thorns. Well, if one is all tangled up, you just don't, you can't go around it. You've got hundreds of yards of it. The only way you can get through it is using a machete. And of course, some would puncture your sleeves of your fatigue jacket, puncture your trousers, and that's what would cause the infestations or your sores. Talking about torn sleeves, here's an example on the slide. And you can see the next slide, what it looks like when it tears up the trousers. Now I mentioned C rations. It came in a little box. Well, you didn't carry a box. You're carrying a rucksack, weighs 60 to 65 pounds. A flak jacket weighs 10 pounds. A rifle. You would take what was out of the C rations, and you had large cans of the main unit. You had a medium-sized can, which was either fruit, pears, or peaches, or crackers and cheese. And then you had the small can, which was dessert. The main meals, there were 4. ham and limas, beefsteak and potatoes, spaghetti and meatballs, or beans and franks. You guessed it, I ate well. If ever I had spaghetti and meatballs or beans and franks, soldiers would come over and trade with me. And I, coming from the South, like ham and limas. Part of the lore, how did you carry the sea rations and chow socks on the individual on the side? You'll see chow socks tied to his top of his rucksack. How did you put them into the chow socks? One meal at a time, or did you have one sock with just the main meal, another sock with just the goodies, and then one for the dessert? You take one of these medium-sized cans, use church tea, put 4 holes in the cardinal directions, and then we got demolitions, C4 demolitions issued in a package of 50 pounds. And then each man had a little ball of demolitions. And you could take a pinch of this demolitions, put in this little stove, and put your main unit on top, light it, and I mean within seconds, that main meal was hot. A person asked me once, how'd you go to the bathroom? Well, going through the jungle, if you want to do number one, you just went 1 or 2 yards away from anybody and you relieved yourself. I remember the soldiers were young and I wasn't that old. You were regular. You either went in the morning or at night. So at one of the 2 times, you go off about 10 yards away from anybody and you dig a little hole called a cap hole, 6 to 8 inches deep. You do your thing and you cover it up and you go on your business. Children, when we would hit a little small grouping of 6 to 8 bamboo hooches where the farmers and their families lived, there were always a lot of little children. Never any men. They were either off in the mountains working with the North Vietnamese soldiers, or they knew we were coming, they would run and hide. And the women and the older children were working the rice paddies. It was terrible being a woman. I mean, they worked all day. With the children was the mama son, the grandmother. Little children, they all had white t-shirts on and nothing below the waist. And yes, their kids became potty trained a lot earlier than ours did. The children, if we were going by the hooches, if the kids came out, they all knew 4 words. Hi, GI, candy, chocolate. They knew those 4 words. And sure enough, we'd have soldiers reach in their rucksacks, pull out candy bars and give them. Now, if we hit one of these villages and the children stayed inside, looking through the cut outside where light was to go into the hooch or in the door, oh, you became very alert. You put a round in the chamber. You moved the selector switch off a safe to full automatic. You picked up 10 yards between men. If the man in front of you looked to the front right, you looked to the front left. Why? Because those children had told you there was enemy soldiers nearby, waiting maybe to ambush you, or at least nearby, that they could move against you. There was no saluting at all, none whatsoever. We wore subdued markings on our uniform, samples of subdued patches on the table in the back. Now, you're going through the jungle. You're on a little trail, and you see a tire track. Now, you know there's no automobile going through the jungle on a path, little trail at this wide. Well, you have what's called a Ho Chi Minh sandal. Ho Chi Minh sandal, they took tires, cut them off the silhouette of a foot, and run the tongue up where the person's big toe went through. The North Vietnamese army, they didn't have boots. Their soldiers had Ho Chi Minh sandals. So somebody had come down this trail, some enemy had been on that trail. It rained almost every other day. So it would obliterate any signs except something recent. Let's go on a mission. Close your eyes. Everybody close your eyes. Now come on, there's one or two that aren't. Close your eyes. Now when you run into one of these trails, you step on it and you pat your feet. So pat your feet on the floor. Pat your feet. Just pat your feet on the floor. Okay, what is it? Is it soft or is it hard? You know it's soft. You're on carpet. Well, if you hit this trail and you patted it with your foot and it was soft, what did that tell you? It was just used by maybe the farmer families going back and forth, not by a large number of North Vietnamese army, enemy. Now, keep your eyes closed, pat, and let's hypothetically say it was hard. Then what did that tell you? Okay, enemy had moved up that trail and packed, compressed the dirt. Now keep your eyes closed. It's dark in the jungle at night. Say 1:30, 2 o'clock. Bunch of hooches off to your right, run a couple hundred yards. You hear a dog barking. Arf, 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 arf. 3, maybe 5 minutes later, over here onto your left front, where there's another little group of hooches, you hear a dog barking. Okay, you can open your eyes. You can figure out what we've discovered. You know what dogs do. They bark when people come around. Now the farmers, they don't wander around at night. It's only the enemy. So we had enemy moving. And in what direction? From this side to this side. And what was the time interval between the dogs barking? Not very long. So it was a small element, maybe 5 minutes or less. Talked about firefights. Firefight is where the enemy's shooting at you and you're shooting back, and it's a unit, not just 1 or 2 men. It's they got a unit and you got a unit, obviously. A firefight, the noise is deafening. You can hardly hear yourself think. All of their rifles and machine guns are shooting. All of your rifles and machine guns are shooting. They're throwing grenades. They are, we are. A grenade is nothing but a small little bomb, maybe the size of a baseball. But when it goes off, it's very loud. And then there are other weapons, handheld weapons, that are going off. And you may have, the enemy may have, and we have mortars and rockets going off. You may be calling in aerial rocket artillery to support you, those gunships. You may be calling in Air Force aircraft to support you. Very noisy. A bullet going past your head. Same principle as lightning and thunder. There's a bullet going past, separating the air, the atmosphere, coming back together. Obviously, not anywhere near as loud as thunder. Well, when you heard that, you were elated. The bullet had gone past you. It had missed you. You hadn't been hit. You were alive. You weren't dead. And then it sinks in. Somebody out there is aiming at you. Somebody out there is trying to kill you. and your body goes into full self-preservation mode. You want to curl up in a little ball and get beneath the surface of the earth for protection. But you can't, because you're the leader. You've got to constantly know what the situation is. You've got to completely and always be informing your next higher headquarters. You've got to know if you need to shift maybe some of your company from one side to the other, or maybe take part of the company and maneuver around and come in on the side of the enemy. You've got indirect fire support that you have to coordinate. You've got to maintain control. Talk about fire support. In the company we carried only one mortar because of the weight. Now the battalion, the next higher headquarters unit, did have a mortar platoon of 3 4.2 mortars. Artillery. American artillery is the greatest in the world, period. If anybody tells you somebody's got better artillery than the Americans, they don't know. They've never been in combat. It's fast. It's reliable. It's flexible. It's wonderful. Artillery is controlled, should be controlled, by the forward observer artillery team that comes to the company. 3 men, an officer, a sergeant, and a radio man. Unfortunately, many company commanders in Vietnam messed it up and tried to play artillery and direct the artillery on their own. That's not your job as a company commander. That's the forward observer's job. And they were you tell them, my forward observer was wonderful. Walter Harper, the artillery battery that he had controlled 6 artillery tubes. His next higher headquarters, they would send new forward observers out to be a day with him to see how to do it. We had what was called organic artillery. The 6 tubes, usually artillery is kept back at higher up division level, consolidated, and then when a unit was to go out on a mission, it would be told you're in direct support, not with the first cab. The artillery went with the battalion. Wherever the battalion went, our 6 tubes of Charlie Battery, 1st of the 77th, went with us. These were the lightweight 105 millimeter howitzer batteries. Now, this slide will show the Chinook helicopter carrying an artillery piece. Underneath it, a bag of 40 rounds. You could go in on a landing zone with the company, secure it. Chinooks bring in the artillery pieces, and within 5 minutes, they would be registered and ready to fire. You could go out on what's called an artillery raid. You would go to the extreme range of friendly artillery and pick a landing zone and put the company down, put the battery of artillery down, and then either bring in other companies to fan out and go on operations, or bring in a lot of extra ammo and fire an additional range of the artillery piece in the enemy's backyard. We were looking for the enemy. We were cocky. We tried to operate in his backyard. Aerial rocket artillery I've mentioned, in the Air Force. Now, you could sometimes have jet aircraft, and they would give the pilot your company frequency, radio frequency, and you would ask him, how long can you stay on station? Because if an airplane is circling around over you, the enemy doesn't have a tendency to shoot at you. Because if he does, he's picked up, and then that airplane comes down with machine gun, rockets, or napalm, or bombs. And so it's just wonderful to have that airplane circling around over you. But you'd ask a jet aircraft, how long do you have on station? They'd say, well, I got 10 minutes, 15 before I've got to go because the fuel's running low. there were 2 squadrons, 2 units of A-1E Sky Raiders in Vietnam. This is an old propeller-driven Navy aircraft. Still has tail hook on it. Picture of it on the back table. You'd ask that pilot, how long do you have on station? He would call back, how many days till Christmas? When's your DROS? That's the day to return to overseas station. Everybody knew the exact number of days you had to, your year was up, to go back to the world. We loved Sky Raiders. Our resident, Larry Chambers, has 2,000 hours in the Sky Raider. I went on 2 Sky Raider missions. I have maximum 10 minutes flying one. Now, you may ask, what was some of the difficulties? My greatest difficulty, the greatest difficulty, was the rules of engagement. When you go to war, go to win. Why come up with rules of engagement that ties the trigger puller's hands behind his back? We were in what was called a free fire zone, where you could shoot at anything at any time, or rules of engagement. You could only be shot, you could only shoot if you were shot at. Now, can you imagine what it's like to look at a young 18-year-old soldier, say you're walking point today, and you can't shoot unless you're shot at? It's tragic. Also artillery. Sometimes you had to have the local Vietnamese village chief, which is quite a county, to give permission to shoot artillery. I was in a big firefight one day. It was Sunday. The village chief had said, I'm taking a nap, don't wake me up. And I requested artillery, and he didn't come. Tragic. Now, living conditions. I've called the bush, jungle, bush. We spent the night in what we call the forward observation base. And we went out in the jungle for usually 3 to 5 days maximum. Then came back and were the unit securing the battalion headquarters. The others went out on missions. I told you about how they spent the night, 3 men, and what they did. Now, occasionally you would be back at the battalion or higher headquarters, which is brigade or division. It was good. You had extra food, any leftover food you scarfed up. You had shower, maybe. You averaged possibly 1 shower a month. When you were at battalion or higher, super little ingenious, called an Australian shower bucket. It was a canvas bag with a nozzle on the bottom. It would hold 1 gallon of water. So you put a pallet, run this up over a tree, bring it down, fill it up from cans of water there that they provided, and you would hoist it up, and the water would run for about 3 minutes. Wonderful. You maybe get 1 of those a month. But it's not that bad. Remember, it's raining almost every other day. And you got caught in the monsoon season, yes. It rained harder than it's ever rained here ever in history. For 2 hours, and that's it, 2 hours. The design of the helmet, this is not the current design today, but left over from World War II and Korea. And the water would come off the helmet, down the back, and then drip down on your neck, and then down your back. So you had what was basically a mini shower, because you got completely wet almost every other day. Get replacement batteries. Batteries came in a plastic bag, a plastic sack, waterproof. That was a prized possession. You put your wallet, put letters from home, try to have two so you could put your ball of demolitions in one. Anything else that you want to keep dry, you put in these plastic bags. Prized possessions. I mentioned the Kit Carson Scout. These were enemy, previously the enemy. More than likely, South Vietnamese, Ba. We had one named Ba, B-A. Before a unit went out on operation, if you went deep into enemy territory, the Air Force would drop millions of safe conduct passes. There are samples on the table tonight, encouraging troops to surrender. So these South Vietnamese, one would surrender, and he would be asked immediately, "Do you want to help the Americans?" You would have roughly 2 weeks worth of training, taught how to be familiar with the rifle and use it, maybe 20 words of English. And he would come out. After maybe 2 weeks in the company, I got Ba. Well, here's somebody that maybe 2 months before was shooting at me. So,
All you
if
hit
he wanted
is
to be a big hero,
this-
who would he shoot?
All you have to do
Me,
is
the
hit it,
commander.
and don't worry about taking
So I was petrified of Ba at the beginning, and I would not give him the rifle. But after about 2 weeks, he proved to be so courageous, so brave, that we gave him the rifle. We had a little ceremony with 2 meters cross rifle, he walked under it, and I gave him a rifle and some magazines. Greatest satisfaction. As a company commander, my greatest satisfaction was taking care of the soldiers. Yes, I had missions that were dangerous every day. Yes, I had casualties. But my job was to try to get as many as possible back to the world at the end of their year. I dug a foxhole with them. We shared hardships. I ate last. I got wet. If we were in the jungle and the helicopter couldn't come in to deliver food or water, I did without normal food and water. I'm in contact with 3 soldiers to this day from the company. About 7 years or so ago, 3 of them, one from California, one from Missouri, one from Ohio, came to visit me, spend a long weekend. One came here at Freedom Plaza with his wife, and we had lunch in the dining hall. One sends my wife flowers. Every Mother's Day. Water discipline. I was very proud of the fact that I did not have heat casualty the entire time I was in command. Many units had heat casualties. Heat stroke, sunstroke, heat exhaustion. I had forced water discipline. Anytime I had a chance to get good, clean, potable water, I had them empty, drink all the water in their canteens, refill them, and going through the mountains, the foothills, you have a lot of streams coming down from the mountains. Stop, set up security, empty your canteen in your mouth, drink everything, then fill it up. Then the 2-liter carried a big bottle of Halazone tablets, put it in, and that would make the water potable. You would write home to get Kool-Aid packages sent in your letters. And yes, you guessed it, a lot of trading between cherry, strawberry, grape, orange, lime. Troops got what they liked the best. And you put Kool-Aid in there, and that would knock that hard halazone metallic taste out. Evaluate the enemy. Well, you had 2 basic enemies, VC, Vietnamese communists, or South Vietnamese. always in small numbers. Their modes of operation were ambushes, or they would sneak in and kidnap the village chief or anybody in authority and take them out and kill them. You would seldom see them because they would be mixed in with the population during the daytime and operate at night. Or the North Vietnamese Army. I have the highest regard possible for the North Vietnamese Army and their soldiers. They were well trained, well disciplined. Their noise and light discipline was fantastic. Their camouflage, you would almost have to step on them before you knew they were there. They only had one weakness. They were not flexible. In other words, their indirect fire, mortar or rockets, if they had it to where it was supposed to hit here, and it went too long or too short, well, of course, our American artillery, we would adjust right immediately on target. They would not adjust. They would keep all of their allocated ammunition would go either over or short. I had one unusual operation called Operation Rawhide. A little small unit, 25 men, that were supposed to protect the little local settlement village or their little village was Popular Force, PF. Basically, all they knew was how to operate the rifle. They assigned one with me one day to go out several kilometers in the Quai Son Valley, which was where I spent the majority of my time. Usually we moved around, but in the Quai Son Valley, and to bring the civilians and their livestock back. Here's a picture of going out on Operation Rawhide. Now, one of these soldiers in his pack has a duck that he had picked up. I don't know if any of y'all have had duck egg omelets, but if you ever had an opportunity to have a duck egg omelet, do so. They are wonderful. And as you see, we brought the livestock back with them. Now, 2016, one of those three soldiers that came with me went back to Vietnam with the team that goes back looking for missing in action. And it's half American and half Vietnamese looking for missing in action. This farmer, he had been a guide, a pathfinder for the North Vietnamese. He had lived there all his life, so he knew the terrain, and he guided the enemy. And he had been fighting us. He went with this soldier, Herb Marshall, and anyway, we go to places. We fought here on this date, this time. We fought here on this date, this time. But here it is, 49 years later. Shaking hands. And Herb went into this farmer's hooch with his wife and had tea. In closing, I want to thank you for attending. I appreciate your interest in a subject that's fast fading through the years. I invite you to check out any items that are on the table in the rear. Feel free to pick up them up and look at them. And at this time, I would attempt to answer any questions you may have, and I'm going to move back by the table, and if you have a question back there, I will be there available to do that. Thank you to the History Club, and thank you. Yes, sir.
I feel like what the Israelis are facing right now, they don't know who the enemy is. But they do have an understanding of who the enemy is. And the enemy hides within the normal people. They see the North Vietnamese.
No, the North Vietnamese,
They hide within the safety of the people that are being protected, right?
the South Vietnamese, the VC did. Yes, you're right, absolutely correct. The North Vietnamese army, these were in large units. These were hundreds of men. They were up in the mountains in caves and away from the Americans because we had fire superiority.
But you knew where they were when they were hiding.
Well, if we did, we would engage it with artillery or air, but jungle, 1, 2, 3 triple canopy jungle, we frequently did not know where they were. Very difficult.
Are there any other questions?
Say again? No, we didn't know where they were. If we did, we would engage them, but we didn't know where they were. Not exactly enough to shoot at them.
People a chance to.
Use aircraft.
Bill, how did you evacuate the wounded
Oh.
and the dead when you were in a combat
Okay,
area?
the wounded, we evacuate, the military medicine and medical is unbelievable. Of all the soldiers that were wounded and I evacuated to hospitals, of all of them, only one died. So if you got back to the hospital, you lived. There's a medic with each rifle platoon, and when you got hit, you got down, you called for the medic, and as I said, the medic would come to you unless he was dead. First thing he'd do was try to stop the bleeding, the next thing was give a shot of morphine. Then we would use helicopters, medevac helicopters, to evacuate the wounded back to a larger facility that would have an operating table and everything that you would expect with military. And they saved many, many lives. I mean, I've been in a firefight and a soldier went past me and he had a grazing stomach wound and he just slung his weapon and all of his intestines were just hanging out. He had 2 handfuls of intestines. Now, you can't react. You know, I pointed for him to go to where we were collecting the wounded, but I had to keep fighting this, my country.
Any other questions? Anybody else?
Did that answer your question?
I just meant, did they have stretchers?
No, we did not carry stretchers, that's too much weight. You moved dead and wounded with ponchos. Took 4 men to move a dead or a wounded man, one in each corner. And it was hard because it would cramp up your fingernails backwards. But you moved your dead and wounded, you assembled them near the helicopter landing zone or pickup zone. And the senior medic had to prioritize the wounded. And as you might not expect, you sent the ones that had the greatest capability of surviving out first. If a man, yes,
You have another question?
okay,
I have a question. What I should say is that somebody should write a book on how politics destroy the fighting value of the best equipped, best technologically ready army in the world to
Yeah.
lose the battle.
yeah. Well, I wish somebody would. I wish somebody would.
I guess on behalf of the History Club, I'll still take questions afterwards, but I want to be sure that I say that this is the most moving and powerful program that we've had. You made me feel like I was there, and thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you all. Anybody has a question, or if you want to go more into detail, I'll be in the back.